What's up, YouTube? Sorry, this has been a little bit of a fiasco the last week or two. So, let me set this fender up so it has some more light. Alright, so when I made this patch, I made it as a flat piece. I didn't like make to the curvature of the fender, either going this way or this way. Excuse the heater going off there. So you can see I'm going to start with the footage of me and the English wheel on the time warp there. I had to curve the fender back to get it to, hold that proper shape, right? Because otherwise there was going to be a decent amount of filler in there that I didn't realize when I welded it in and I made it look all nice. I was like, wait a minute, there's a divot there. I found it, looking at it from a side profile, but also using one of these profile gauges that I took off of the other side fender, which, it's got a couple dents in the front, but I went back here and found out that, hey, wait a minute, there's a decent gap where I'm gonna have to lay some filler in there, and I really didn't want to do that, right? Let's back up a second. So, last weekend I was in here doing some work, fixing the dents. I've sanded off the inside of the fender because it's like a prerequisite for any time you're going to do hammer dollar work, or, I had sanded off the area for the turn signal where I was welding, so it was a clean weld, but I never sanded off the rest of the inside of the fender. So I was working on a lot of these little dents that are in the car, and some of them are still there, right? They're about as good as I'm going to chase it, right? There's a couple of them that I won't be able to get out because this is like right up against the brake of the fender, right? And this back here has got the brace behind it, and I don't feel like drilling out the spot welds to, fix this little couple dents that are right in that area. And I'm still working on these a little bit. They're mostly done. You can still see there's a little bit of filler there, but I'm still working on it. I spent a couple more minutes and I should be able to get it out to where I'm satisfied. But that's where I found this, and I'm like, all right, I did fix that. So I stuck it in the English wheel, even though that this is already welded in. I needed to put some type of curvature in there. So I've showed this in my tool video. This is a little inexpensive English wheel that my wife found me for, I don't know, it was a birthday or Christmas present. It's like $100. I found it one time on Amazon. I don't know if it's still there. If I do, I'll drop the link in the comments. But for $100, it's a decent English wheel. At least gets you to be able to do some things, right? And I've created a lot of stuff for this car with this little bitty piece of crap, right? It's no $300 or even $1,000 or $5,000 English wheel. It doesn't look like it, but the wheels are pretty small in this. That's why it's so cheap. And the wheels flex. There's a lot of flex in these things, so it doesn't really do a great job, but it gets you 80% there, right? So I'd stuck it in here, and for those of you who don't know how an English wheel works, it's kind of like a metal stretcher. So when you press this lower wheel up against the upper wheel and you start moving the metal in it, it curves it around the profile of whatever the lower wheel is and kind of stretches the metal, right? And there's all sorts of different dies. I had used this die here. You can see the one that's in there currently is more of a flat die, but this is more of a dome, has more of a dome to it. It's for creating sharper curves. This is like what you would make a Fender, gas tank or something out of, like a motorcycle tank. This is really more for, hey, I just want to create a flat curvature going this way, right? Whereas that other one, it would not only shape it this way, but also this way, right? I hope I explained that right. I know it's a little difficult, but I stuck it in here and rolled it back and forth a couple times, and I got the profile right. The problem is because it was already welded in, it created some, it stretched it too much, and when you try to stretch metal inside the middle of the panel, metal doesn't work that way. Whenever you move metal from one place, it's got to go somewhere else. So it created a couple ripples that I'm now trying to knock back out. And you can see I was using Dicom or machinist die, whichever flavor you want to call it, to give me an idea of where I was high, where I was low. You can see there's some low spots here, right? This is where the metal was welded in, and this is where the shrinkage happens whenever you weld, and I'll kind of try and give you guys a little bit of an explanation about that later. But then you saw me going back and forth, you know, both sides, doing hammer and dolly. And I actually had a couple questions from some guys based on the last video, you know, like, hey, you know, hammer dolly, you know, it's like this, it seems pretty freaking easy, but it really isn't. And you kind of have to know how metal reacts to things to understand how it works. And I'm not the best expert on it. There's a lot of other guys on YouTube that could give you a better explanations and better techniques on it, but I'm still gonna try and answer it the best I can for the guys that asked. So when you are fixing a dent, so that's kind of option number one. As long as the dent isn't too big, say like something like this, right, or even, you know, some of these little bit larger ones, regular steel when it was pressed will try to remember that memory. Steel has memory. Whatever shape it was pushed into, it's going to try to remember that. So you can usually take a hammer and with just a dolly to keep it from moving everywhere else, and you would do a hammer off dolly technique, and I'll explain that a little bit later, but a hammer off dolly technique to just pop it back into its original shape. As long as it wasn't stretched during the impact originally, it should go right back into that shape, right? A lot of guys have done tricks where you just heat the metal up a little bit and it tries to expand and then it forces itself back into it. That's a really old school technique. PDR guys, they do the same thing. You know, they just kind of massage the metal and try to get it to pop back into its original location, and they're doing all of this with kind of a hammer off dolly technique, right? Now, if it's stretched, that's a different story, right? That's where you get into some serious damage on a fender, like this. This is stretched, right? This has been stretched, it's been shrunk, so the metal's doing all sorts of different things, and you'll have to do a combination of hammer on dolly, hammer off dolly, and I'll explain that in just a second. But what I'm still finishing or fucking around with here is now I've got both highs, lows, and stretch and shrinks. So I'm slowly but surely working out. And this is what happens when you guys, shouldn't say you guys, when I rush things, right? I didn't even think that, hey, there's a profile on this panel that I gotta match. I'm just gonna weld it in because I was excited about making a little video for you guys. And I knew I was on camera, and you know, I had limited time that day, so I was like, I'm just gonna burn it in. Didn't even think about it till much later. And I'm like, okay, that was a bonehead mistake, and guess what? It's already on the internet, so it's there, right? So I've been futzing with this, and I accidentally overstretched one area, so now I gotta pull out my shrinking disc and shrink this area just a little bit, just so I don't have a big bubble in the spot where, you know, it's not gonna match the rest of the car. So let's get into hammer dolly technique, get that out of the way. I'm gonna use my whiteboard here to kind of visualize this for you guys. And like I said, there's other guys out on the internet that do a better job of this, so picture, that's a crappy marker. That's garbage. Picture this as your flat panel, right? And hammer off dolly technique, like I was talking about, to fix like a dent or pop out a dent where it hasn't been stretched. When you create a dent in a car, right, it doesn't actually look like this from, you know, like if you're looking through the cross section of the metal, it doesn't actually look like that. It actually kind of does this, right? Because I was saying, if you didn't stretch the metal still got to go somewhere, right? Even if you didn't stretch it, it still has to go somewhere. So what it does is, on the outsides of the lows, there's a high spot, just a very little bitty high spot, right? I'm over dramatizing this, right? So say I hit a fender, say we're looking at a fender, excuse me, and I hit it right here, right? I just whacked it with a hammer. Well, around that dent is this circular high spot, right? Because again, the metal's tied into everything around it, so it creates like a circular shape. Right now, if you did a dent like that, it would look more like this, right? So you guys get kind of the picture, right? Here's the inside of the dent. That's the crevice or the deepest portion of it. This would be the metal that was raised, as long as it was not stretched. Again, keyword, it cannot be stretched. All right, so to correct it, which usually these are the easy ones that I can do all day long, you take your dolly and you want to make sure your dolly, everything's clean on the backside, right? And this is only if you can get to the backside of a Fender, by the way. If you can't get to a backside of the Fender, you're SOL, right? That's where the PDR guys really shine with those rods, where they can actually get into some really tight places. So this is a straight Fender. This is a straight dolly. You take your little hammer, and excuse my stick figure hammer. You take your hammer while keeping your dolly on the backside, pushing up, giving pressure, right? Because you want to push the metal here. Whenever you're hammering on something, the impact of the metal is going. It's creating energy somewhere inside this, right? So you're hammering on the high spot while pushing up on the low spot, and hopefully it just kind of pops it right back out, right? And sometimes you just tap it all the way around it and you clean it up. Now, is it going to be perfect? The answer is no, but if you're not a professional metal fabricator, that's good enough for you. You'll be just able to put a skim coat of filler over everything and block it out smooth, and nobody will ever know that there was a damage there. And this is kind of what I'm going after here on my car. I am a hobbyist. I've done this for 20-something years, but I don't do it full time, and I've only done it, in periods, as I'm working throughout these cars, because not everything's metal work. So I'm a hobbyist. I have hobbyist tools. This is the level that I am satisfied with. You guys would probably be the same. Now, if you were a true metalsmith and you're trying to get it absolutely perfect, you will spend an hour or two, and then you might actually find that there was some stretches just a little bit inside there, because even when I say this, there's still going to be a little bit of stretch, just a tiny bit. And they'll pull out a shrinking disc or a torch, and they'll metal shrink it, or they'll do what's called cold shrinking. I haven't figured out how to do that. I've never mastered that one. So that's your hammer off dolly technique, because you're not actually hammering directly on the dolly. You're hammering on the high spot while pushing up and low. This is hammer off dolly. Now, but this is where I get into problems, or where I cause problems for myself. So here's your metal that you're working with, but then you weld in a new spot, right? So you weld in a patch, right? Well, first off, when you MIG, or even if you TIG weld, but when you MIG weld, you're going to have more of a filler or a proud. And if you penetrate it properly, it'll be on the backside as well. Hopefully less on the backside than the front, right? But in this location here, and depending on how good of a welder you are, this is where the heat from the metal kind of cause distortion. This is where I get myself into trouble, is because I get too much heat either into the weld, or when I try to grind off the proud, I'm like, drilling in on that, trying to grind that down and get it smooth, and it creates shrinkage in this location. Now, the problem here is, I said earlier, metal kind of has a memory. Well, this new patch and your filler have no memory whatsoever, right? So when you go to hammer and dolly on stuff, if you do not get that weld proud completely flat, right, what you're doing is you're digging into the metal. So if I had some filler left on the backside and I stuck a dolly on that, right, and I'm hammering on it from this side or whatever, all I'm doing is I'm pushing this little bubble blob into the metal, and it causes the exact ripple on the outside. That's something I missed when I was talking about this in the footage that I lost. So be careful of that, guys. I talked about the metal having memory, just your patch doesn't have it, your weld doesn't have it, right? So that's why you try to get your patch to be perfect before you weld it in. You try to only put as much heat into the panel as possible, so that when you're done, it is a perfect patch, right? And if you're a good welder, you don't need a lot of filler. You don't need a lot of heat, just enough to fuse the two pieces of metal together. And then sand off that little bit of proud, a little bit, you know, it takes you 5 minutes, 30 seconds if you're really good, and then a little hammer dolly work, because this is shrunk, right? And this metal is gonna have a lot of tension, it's gonna be a little warped. I can't really draw that on a two-dimensional plane. And that's where you would hammer on dolly to stretch that metal back out, relieve the tension, and get it to a uniform shape. But again, the key piece is you gotta have the filler perfect ground off and make sure that your patch is the same thickness and that it's welded in perfectly flat. And then you can go at it like that. So I'm gonna continue working on this. I'm gonna do some video lapse or time lapse on it as I'm working through it. But the whole point is putting the Dicam on here. It gives you a visual to work with this. Another way of doing it is if the metal was, like, say, smooth or polished, like it's pretty shiny right here. If I wanted to find a high or low spot, I could just take a file to it, sand in one direction, and it'll show you where the highs are, and wherever it doesn't sand is the low spot. That's the same thing this Dicam is doing. So just so you guys fully see everything, right? I'm using a block that's only a certain size to match this area, right? It is a flat block, but I'm not trying to, you know, contour it or create a profile with body filler or anything like that. So I'm just sanding over it real lightly to find where my high spots are. This is 220. I'm again not trying to sand down this fender or turn it into tinfoil. I want to scratch off that Dicam, right? So just a couple passes back and forth, and I can see what I'm working on. So back to the time warp, guys, and let's see if I can actually unbooger this. All right, so I don't know if you can actually see this properly with the glares. I had a hell of a time trying to heat shrink this with it's sitting on the fender here, because you have to put pressure on the fender, and it was just pushing it all over the place. So you can see here, I've gotten it. Hopefully you can see it. I don't. See there's only a little bit of blue left, but you see those dark spots right there? That's where the metal was heat shrunk, right? So now it's shrunk too much, and now I need to hammer on dolly and stretch it back out a little bit. And then I just got to clean up this bottom corner here, and then I'm going to be pretty satisfied with it. This is actually turning out really good. Normally when I work too hard on something like this, I actually end up making it worse. So I'm pretty pleased. But I told you I'd show you what a hammer off dolly and hammer on dolly sound like. Let me shut off the heater so you can actually hear it. So like I said, I got a hammer on dolly right here to stretch that back out just a little bit because it was heat shrunk too much. Really no way of controlling that with my tools. Waiting for the heater to shut off. And then I'm going to do the same thing down here. I'm going to hammer on dolly there as well, because there's a high spot and a low spot, and what I'm trying to do is get the metal to conform to the shape of the dolly. And I'm using a dolly that has the same curvature as the back of the panel, right? So when I lay it up against the back of the panel, it's almost 100% perfect as far as the shape of the dolly. That's what I want, because when I hammer on Dolly, I want the metal to conform to the shape of the Dolly, not, or yes, I want it to conform to the shape of the Dolly. If I didn't have the right Dolly, then it would either be too much, too high, too low, whatever, however you want to quantify it as. I'm on here, shut off. There we go. So again, I'm going to start up here first, and you know, a lot of the metalsmith guys, they tell you lock your elbow and, you know, hold the hammer like this and just, you know, use your wrist. I've never been good at that, so I choke up on the hammer. You know, I use my finger as a guide so that I'm doing this, and I don't move my elbow, but I just gently tap to start off with. There's off Dolly, because, you know, I don't always get it on the Dolly right off the bat. You can hear it's got a hollow, it's like hitting an oil can, right? Where's my Dolly? Hear that? It's got a high ting to it. It's not perfectly on there. That's because I'm hitting a low spot. There we go. It sounds like I'm hitting an anvil. Just hit it a couple times. If you do it too much, then you gotta chase it, and that's not what you want to do. And that feels pretty close. Again, I don't want to stretch it too much, because if I do, then again, I'm gonna create another high spot. Alright guys, sorry. IT guy having problems with the camera. Go figure. I lost some footage. I don't know if the camera ran out of juice, or the SD card got full or something, or this camera just wigged out and shut off on itself. I don't know. I lost a good 5 minutes of footage or something of getting all this stuff out, and it's not 100% done. It's not 100% perfect, but it is done in my opinion. There's a couple little spots where when I metal finished this, I took a DA sander with 220 grit and I just kind of wiped over it just to give it a nice clean profile. And there's still some little spots of Dykem, right? Just tiny little bits, right? And there's some little low spots from where I was hammering on things. A skim coat of filler is not going to harm this, right? Every car is going to have a skim coat of filler on it. At least any car that's been modified or worked on, or in a body shop or anything like that. It's going to have that skim coat, because it's how you make that laser straight profile when you get to the paint job. You just want the metal to not really have a crap load of filler in one location, and this little stuff here, this is nothing, right? You can barely feel that with your finger. I mean, barely. You know, I see it. I don't necessarily feel it, but I can see it, right? And I'll wrap up this video here in just a second. So these videos are twofold. One is to document my process so that I'm not typing a book report on a forum somewhere. If you guys want to see those, historical stuff before I started making videos, the ChicagoGarage.com, even though it's the Chicago Garage. We got guys from Australia, all over the world on this site, so feel free to join up if you're into forums. But I've documented that stuff there for years. It's easier to actually show what I'm doing and the level of effort that goes into it without a wall of text and a couple of pictures that I always forget to take by doing a video. So that's my documentation process. It helps me, kind of helps other people that are following it. And then the second piece is it helps other people, right? Some people come across my videos and some people are doing some of these things on their own cars. I'm not the expert. There's a lot of other people out there that do better explanations than I do and better work than I do. I'd be happy to share that probably in another video of here are the people that I've learned from on YouTube. But hopefully these things help people and help them understand the problems that they're creating for themselves, or the problems that somebody else created that they have to fix. Just get to it. Don't be afraid to do this, guys. This is not rocket science, I should say. And anybody can do this work. It takes experience, takes a little bit of knowledge, and there's a lot of things I've done on this car where I had no knowledge of doing it before, experience of doing it before. I watched a couple videos and I was able to replicate it pretty good, pretty decent. right? Just get after it, guys. Any questions, any explanations? Sorry for the ramble. Drop them in the comments. Send me another message if you guys want further clarification on something. However you want to do it, I'm happy to answer the stuff for you guys. But till next time, thanks for watching.